You know what hurts the most? Seeing that look in your father's eyes saying you're stupid while you're killing yourself studying and nothing sticks in your head. Back then, I didn't even know I had a problem. I just knew it hurt. The parish picnic of St. Anthony's Catholic Church, summer of 1960. The air thick with charcoal smoke and the scent of grilling sausages. Children darting between checkered tablecloths spread on patchy grass. Parents chatting in clusters, paper plates balanced on their knees. A perfect Brooklyn Sunday in July. I was 8 years old, in a blue cotton dress my mother had sewn from remnant fabric. My dark hair pulled back in 2 braids so tight they made my scalp ache. The church had organized a small talent show for the children, singing reciting poems, showing off cartwheels. When my turn came, Father Donovan smiled encouragingly, his round face shining with sweat in the summer heat. Marcella Wilson will now read a passage from her school reader, he announced through the crackly microphone. I stood frozen before the makeshift stage, clutching my book. The familiar panic seized me as I stared at the page letters squirming like insects, rearranging themselves, mocking me. Mrs. Abernathy, my Sunday school teacher, had practiced with me for weeks. I'd memorized the passage about Noah's Ark, word for word. But now, under the weight of all those expectant eyes, the memorization crumbled. And God told Noah to build an... I stammered, the words sticking in my throat like fish bones. Someone snickered. Then another. I looked up, searching desperately for my mother's face in the crowd. She stood at the back, hands clutched together as if in prayer, eyes willing me to continue. And there beside her was my father, Anthony Wilson, his broad shoulders tense, face darkening like a gathering storm. "Speak up, girl, we can't hear you," a man called out. I tried again, my voice trembling. God told Noah to build a bee-boat. An ark, it's called. An ark, for Christ's sake. My father's voice boomed across the churchyard. Silence fell. He pushed through the crowd, work-roughened hands clenched at his sides. "What's wrong with you? We practiced this." The book shook in my hands. "I'm sorry, Daddy. What's the point of sending her to school if she can't read a simple children's story?" He turned to address the crowd, now his arm sweeping toward me in an accusatory gesture. 8 years old and can barely read her own name. The nuns say she's got potential. Potential for what? Scrubbing floors. "Anthony, please." My mother's soft voice barely carried as she hurried forward, but my father was already grabbing the book from my hands, holding it up to the onlookers. "Look at this first-grade reader in the middle of second grade. And still she can't." "That's enough, Anthony." Father Donovan stepped between us, his voice firm but kind. "Children learn at their own pace." The whispers rippled through the crowd. Poor Marcella. Something wrong with that one. Shame about the Wilson girl. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, a wet stain spreading across the front of my dress. The shame of wetting myself in front of the entire parish burned worse than any punishment my father could devise. My mother rushed to wrap her cardigan around my waist, hurrying me away, while Father Donovan placed a restraining hand on my father's shoulder. As we left, I heard my father's voice slightly muted, but still carrying clearly in the summer air. "There's nothing wrong with my daughter except laziness. I'll fix it. You watch, I'll fix it." That was the day everything changed. That was the day my father decided to fix what was broken in me, not knowing he would nearly destroy me in the process. My name is Marcella Wilson, though everyone knows me now as Grandma Marcy. I'm 73 years old, speaking to you from my apartment here in Brooklyn, where the coffee is always hot and the memories never quite cool, even with the ceaseless noise of the city outside my window. I was born tiny in 1952, a 7-month preemie weighing just 1 pound 7 ounces. The nurses called me the Sparrow because I could fit in my father's palm with room to spare. Back then, a child born that early was almost a miracle to survive. And I did survive, but life always charges its price, doesn't it? My mother, Betty, would tell the story of those 40 days I spent in the hospital. I prayed the rosary until my fingers bled, she'd say, twisting her wedding band. My father, Anthony, worked as a loader at the Fulton Fish Market, coming home each night smelling of brine and cigarettes. My mother did tailoring work from our kitchen table. They scraped together every penny for the hospital bills and still ended up owing favors to half the neighborhood. I grew up chubby and seemingly healthy. Eat a little more Marcella to get strong, my mother would say, as if food could fix anything. But the problem wasn't with my body. It was with my brain. School became my battlefield. I was 7 when I started a year late because my mother had been afraid to send me earlier. I remember that first day vividly blue dress with white polka dots that Mama had sewn all night, white socks that kept slipping down black patent leather shoes that pinched my toes. I was so excited to learn to read and write like the big kids. Mrs. Johnson was my teacher, a woman with her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her entire face. She wrote on the blackboard with perfect chalk letters, which I thought were the most beautiful things in the world, until I tried to copy them. The other children looked at the board, copied understood. I looked and saw only marks that danced letters, that switched places numbers, that jumbled themselves into nonsense. "Marcella, why haven't you copied the lesson?" Mrs. Johnson would ask, peering over my desk. "I did copy it, teacher," I'd answer, showing my notebook. "But this isn't what's on the board, child." And it wasn't. I was certain I was copying correctly, but when I looked at other children's notebooks, I saw that mine was completely different. Letters, crooked words, missing pieces, entire lines skipped. While the other children were putting letters together to form words, I was still struggling with the alphabet. I cried hidden in the school bathroom. Each night, I prayed to St. Jude of the impossible causes to make me smart. My mother realized something wasn't right. Every evening, after washing the dinner dishes, hands still smelling of lemon soap, she would sit with me at the kitchen table. "Come on, sweetie, let's try again. B with A makes BA, B with E makes BE." I would repeat, memorize, but by the next morning, everything had vanished from my mind like water through a sieve. I could see the disappointment in her eyes, even when she tried to hide it. My father was a different story. A hard man raised in rural Pennsylvania, he viewed education almost as a luxury, especially for a girl. "What's all this schooling for?" he'd mutter, cleaning fish scales from beneath his fingernails with a pocket knife. "A woman needs to learn to cook, clean, keep house." But he agreed to send me to school perhaps because of my mother's insistence, perhaps because he wanted a daughter he could brag about to the other loaders at the fish market. My first report card was devastating. Failing grades in everything with teacher's notes, claiming I wasn't paying attention, that I talked too much. A complete fabrication. I was terrified to speak, that I was always daydreaming. My mother sighed deeply when she saw it, said quietly that she would figure something out. My father had another reaction entirely. "What the hell is this?" The report card trembled in his large calloused hand as he stood in our small living room, still wearing his work clothes. The smell of fish and sweat filled the space between us. "I'm spending money on supplies, on uniforms, and you show up with these grades." "I do study, Dad," I tried to explain, tears already welling. "I swear I study." "A liar on top of everything." He tossed the report card onto the coffee table. "You're taking after your mother's side of the family. All good-for-nothings." Mama stepped between us. "Anthony, please, she's trying—" He raised his hand. The slap didn't come, but the gesture alone was enough to silence her. In our house, his word was always final. The next day, without telling my father, my mother took me to see Dr. Patterson. His office occupied the lower part of his house in Greenpoint, smelling of antiseptic and furniture polish. He'd been our family doctor for years, had even delivered me. "So what seems to be the problem with our little Marcella?" he asked, peering at me over wire-rimmed glasses. My mother explained everything, my struggles at school, the way letters seemed to move on the page, how I could understand a story when read aloud, but couldn't make sense of it on paper. Dr. Patterson examined me thoroughly. He had me identify letters, draw shapes, read simple words. He asked if I often confused my left and right. I did. He tested my vision, which was perfect. Finally, he sat back in his creaking chair and looked seriously at my mother. Mrs. Wilson Marcella has what we call a learning disability likely related to her premature birth. Some areas of the brain may not have developed completely. My mother's face drained of color. Is there a cure, Doctor? It's not a disease to have a cure, Mrs. Wilson. It's a condition. He removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. Marcella isn't stupid, far from it. Her brain simply works differently. She'll need more time, more patience, different teaching methods. He handed us a letter for the school, and a strange feeling took root in my chest. For the first time, my problem had a name and explanation. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't lack of effort. It was something in my brain that I couldn't control. Let's not tell your father for now, my mother whispered as we left, squeezing my hand. He wouldn't understand. And so began our secret. The letter was delivered to school, and Mrs. Johnson, though not fully understanding what I had started, giving me more attention. She would keep me after class for 15 minutes, showing me letters more slowly. My mother bought a special notebook with thicker lines that helped a little. I tried desperately to improve. I slept with books under my pillow, hoping knowledge would seep into my brain overnight. I made promises to God, to the saints, to anyone who might be listening. My grades improved slightly, but remained far from good. At the end of the year, Dr. Patterson suggested I repeat the grade. It would give Marcella more time to assimilate the material, he explained. Forcing her to move forward will only frustrate her more. My mother agreed, but then came the greater challenge, telling my father. Anthony had developed a habit of asking me to read newspaper headlines to his friends, making a spectacle of his educated daughter. C doesn't pay attention, he'd say when I inevitably stumbled over the words. The teacher says she's smart, but all I see is laziness. When the final report card arrived in December 1960 with failed stamped in red, my mother intercepted it before I could show my father. She hid it inside her mattress. We'll tell him after Christmas, sweetie. Let's not ruin the holidays. That was a strange Christmas. I received a cloth doll my mother had sewn in secret, a new dress made from fabric remnants, and a leaden feeling of failure that no gift could disguise. While helping prepare our once-yearly turkey, I dreaded the coming year, returning to the same class, seeing the looks of classmates who had advanced without me. On New Year's Eve, after neighbors had gone home and my father had consumed more whiskey than usual, he called me into the living room. The Christmas tree lights cast colored shadows across his face, making him look otherworldly. So, Marcella, he said, swirling amber liquid in his glass, got your school results yet? Did you pass? My heart pounded. I glanced toward the kitchen where my mother was washing dishes, and she made a small gesture warning me to stay quiet. My father caught the exchange. What's this? Are you hiding something from me? No, Dad, I stammered. The school hasn't given the results yet. It was my first direct lie to him, and it emerged as crooked as my letters in the notebook. He narrowed his eyes. What do you mean they haven't given it? It's the end of the year. Every other kid in the neighborhood knows if they passed. The teacher said they would send it by mail. I improvised, feeling sweat bead on my upper lip. My mother entered, drying her hands on her apron. Anthony, leave the girl alone. It's New Year's Eve. Let's talk about good things. He looked from one to the other, suspicion hardening his features. There's something fishy here. You two are hiding something. The rest of that night passed in heavy silence. My father drank until he fell asleep in his armchair. My mother tucked me into bed, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Everything will be okay, sweetheart. We'll figure it out tomorrow." But deep in my child's heart, I knew nothing would be okay. The new year that should have brought hope only brought dread. January 1st, 1961 dawned with thin winter sunlight streaming through frost-etched windows. The smell of coffee and day-old bread heating on the stove mingled with tension thick enough to cut. My father woke with a hangover, grumbling and complaining about his headache. On such days, we knew to stay quiet to avoid drawing attention. I remained in my room, arranging my few dolls, pretending the world outside didn't exist. January slipped away, and soon it was February time for school enrollment. My mother could no longer postpone the inevitable conversation. She chose a Tuesday evening when my father came home in an unusually good mood. He had managed to bring home some slightly bruised fruit that would have been discarded at the market, apples with brown spots over ripe bananas, which my mother transformed into a simple but delicious dessert. "Anthony," she began, her voice soft as she refilled his coffee cup. "We need to talk about Marcella's school." I froze, my spoon suspended mid-air with banana pudding that never reached my mouth. "What about school?" he asked, still distracted by his dessert. "I received her report card before Christmas." My mother's hands twisted in her apron. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin the holidays." My father looked up, suddenly alert. "And why would it ruin the holidays? Didn't she pass?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mother lowered her eyes, I hunched my shoulders, and my father's face transformed suspicion to shock. Shock to anger. "She didn't pass." His voice rose steadily. "My daughter repeated a year as the school playing games with me? Or is it you who didn't study, you little brat?" "Anthony, don't speak to her like that," my mother interjected. "The girl has a problem." "Problem? What problem?" He slammed his cup-down coffee, sloshing onto the tablecloth. "This girl doesn't have any problem except laziness? How come others pass and she doesn't? Does everyone have a problem?" My mother took a deep breath and told him about our visit to Dr. Patterson, about what he had said regarding my premature birth and learning difficulties. My father listened, his face reddening progressively. When my mother finished, he struck the table so forcefully that dishes jumped. "That's your invention, and that quack doctor's. There's no such thing as a brain problem. That's an excuse for laziness, and you encourage it by taking her behind my back." Anthony, the doctor, explained. "I don't want to know what that doctor said. I want to know why you two lied to me. Why did you hide the report card? Why this charade?" I began crying silently, tears sliding down my cheeks. My father looked at me with contempt. "Crying doesn't help, Marcella. Tomorrow you're going to school, and you'll study twice as hard to make up for lost time. And if by mid-year you don't improve, you'll go to work no more, wasting money on someone who doesn't want to learn." That night marked the beginning of the worst year of my life. The next morning, my mother took me to register for school. I had to return to the same classroom with the same teacher, but surrounded by children a year younger than me. The shame was overwhelming. "Oh, why is she so big?" I overheard one boy ask during recess. "Because she's stupid. She didn't pass," another replied. Each word pierced like a needle, but I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on my untied shoelaces. At home, the situation deteriorated rapidly. My father now inspected my notebooks daily, demanding I complete homework at the kitchen table where he could watch. When I made mistakes, which was often, he would slam his fist down, sometimes tearing the page from the notebook. "Look at this," he would exclaim, holding up my crooked writing. "A 3-year-old writes better. Are you doing this on purpose to humiliate me?" One evening, as I struggled with a simple addition worksheet, he leaned over my shoulder. His breath smelled of whiskey and cigarettes. 7 plus 5, Marcella. What's 7 plus 5, Yesen? Nurse." I stared at the numbers, watching them swap positions before my eyes. 13, I ventured. The back of his hand caught my cheek before I realized what was happening. 12. It's 12. What kind of idiot doesn't know 7 plus 5? My mother rushed in from the kitchen, dish towel still in hand. "Anthony, she made a simple mistake. Every day it's simple mistakes. Every day it's excuses." He turned to her, finger pointed accusingly. "You baby her? That's the problem. You make excuses for her stupidity." My father's anger seemed to grow with each passing week. At night, I could hear my parents arguing through the thin walls of our apartment. "She's trying, Anthony," my mother would plead. "Not hard enough," came the inevitable reply. In June, my first semester report card arrived. Despite my best efforts, my grades remained poor, some even worse than before. The teacher had written, Marcella shows effort but continues to have serious learning difficulties. I recommend specialized evaluation. When my father saw that paper, he was eerily calm, a silence more frightening than any shouting. He crumpled the report card into a ball and threw it to the floor. "It's decided," he announced flatly. "You're not going to school anymore. You'll start working with me at the fish market. At least you'll learn something useful." My mother was desperate. "Anthony, she's only 8 years old. It's against the law to take her out of school. And who's going to report it?" "You." His laugh was humorless. "She can stay enrolled, but she won't attend classes. She'll help me with work in the morning and study at home in the afternoon. If she doesn't learn at school, she'll learn in life." And so, at 8 years old, I began accompanying my father to work. We left before dawn, when the sky was still midnight blue, to arrive at the fish market for the first deliveries. The Fulton Fish Market was a cacophony of shouting men clattering crates and the constant drip of ice melt. The smell was overwhelming, briny, fishy, with undertones of diesel from the delivery trucks. While my father handled heavy crates of cod and mackerel, I carried what my small arms could manage: bags of clams, boxes of strawberries for the adjacent produce section. The other men would look at me strangely. Some would ruffle my hair or slip me a piece of candy, asking my father, "This your kid, Tony? Why ain't she in school?" "Learning the family business?" He'd reply with a forced laugh. "Besides, school's wasted on her. Can't even read properly." Those mornings at the market, hands raw from cold water and fish scales, feet aching from the concrete floors, taught me more than just how to sort fish by size. They taught me what it meant to be seen as worthless, the looks of pity from the other workers, the casual cruelty of my father's comments. Each day chipped away at whatever fragile self-worth remained. We would return home by noon exhausted. My father would take a nap while my mother tried to teach me something useful. But I was often too tired to focus properly. The letters, which already danced before my eyes, now seemed to spin in a dizzying waltz. "Marcella, pay attention." My mother would plead, anxiety lining her face. "Your father will ask what you learned today." And he did ask every night after dinner, the same ritual. He would examine my notebook, looking at the scribbled pages with growing disgust, then quiz me on what I had studied. When I couldn't answer correctly, which was almost always, the punishment followed. In 1961, corporal punishment was commonplace. Parents disciplined children with spankings, belt slippers. But my father had developed methods that left no visible marks, only invisible scars. He would make me kneel on dried corn kernels facing the wall for an hour or more, until my knees felt like they'd been pierced by 1,000 needles. Or he would force me to stand with arms outstretched, holding heavy books, until my muscles quivered with fatigue. Sometimes he locked me in the kitchen pantry, a confined space where I could barely breathe among the canned goods and flour bags. "Maybe this way you'll learn to value studying," he would say, turning the key. My mother cried secretly but could do little. In our house, his word was absolute. And if she defended me too vigorously, she risked becoming his target as well. This routine of work and punishment continued for months. My school attendance became increasingly sporadic. My mother invented excuses: I was sick, I had a doctor's appointment. But the principal grew suspicious. During one of my rare appearances at school, she called me to her office, a room that smelled of chalk dust and furniture polish, with framed certificates covering one wall. "Marcella," she asked, her eyes kind behind cat-eye glasses, "why have you been missing so much school?" I swallowed hard, remembering my father's warning. "If you tell anyone anything, the punishment will be worse." "I've been helping my mother at home." I lied, eyes fixed on my scuffed shoes. "She's been sick." The principal didn't believe me. Her slight frown made that clear. But what could she do? In 1961, there was no Child Protective Services as we know it today. A child who didn't attend school was just another statistic. By the end of that year, I had failed again due to absences. The report card arrived by mail, and my mother managed to intercept it, but there was no hiding the inevitable forever. "Anthony." She began one night after I had gone to bed, though I listened through the heating vent. "Marcella failed again." There was a long silence, then my father's voice unnervingly calm. I expected that. That one just can't be helped. That calmness frightened me more than any shouting. My father was typically volatile, loud, explosive, but predictable. This new tranquility suggested something worse brewing beneath the surface. Christmas 1961 was even bleaker than the previous one. I received no gifts and wasn't permitted to join the family dinner. I spent the day confined to my room listening to holiday music from neighboring apartments, pretending I was part of their celebrations instead. My mother smuggled me a piece of French toast and kissed my forehead, whispering, "Next year will be better, I promise." But her red-rimmed eyes betrayed her doubt. On New Year's Eve, while neighbors set off firecrackers and toasted with cheap sparkling wine, I lay in bed praying that 1962 would indeed be different, that my father would forgive me, that I would finally learn like other children. My prayers were answered, but not in any way I could have imagined. January 1st, 1962. The date is branded into my memory like a cattle iron on flesh. Midnight had just struck, the last fireworks exploding in distant pops and crackles. I was curled beneath my thin blanket, listening to our neighbors' celebrations through the walls, when my bedroom door creaked open slowly. At first, I thought it might be my mother coming to give me a New Year's kiss, as she sometimes did when my father was asleep. But the strong smell of whiskey and tobacco that swept into the room told me otherwise. "Wake up!" My father's voice was unnaturally controlled. "I know you're not sleeping." I opened my eyes reluctantly, my heart pounding against my ribs. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face obscured by shadow, but I felt his gaze fixed on me like a physical weight. "Get up and come with me," he ordered quietly. "I don't want to wake your mother." That request not to wake my mother frightened me most. My father had never before cared if she witnessed my punishments. In fact, he often seemed to want an audience. I slipped from bed, trembling in my flannel nightgown, bare feet flinching against the cold floor. I followed him down the dark hallway, past my parents' bedroom, where my mother slept exhausted from preparing our modest New Year's meal. The stairs creaked beneath our weight despite my attempt to walk silently. When he stopped before the basement door, terror seized me so completely I thought I might faint. Our basement was a place I avoided at all costs, a low-ceilinged space beneath the staircase where even my father had to stoop. It was perpetually dark and damp, home to spiders and the occasional rat used for storing broken furniture and moldering cardboard boxes of forgotten belongings. "Dad, please," I whispered, tears already flowing. "I promise I'll study more. I'll learn. I swear." He didn't respond. He simply unlocked the rusty padlock, opened the door that protested on unoiled hinges, and switched on a single weak bulb hanging from the low ceiling. The yellowish light barely penetrated the gloom, creating more shadows than illumination. "Get in," he commanded, shoving me forward with enough force that I stumbled and fell to my knees on the dirt-covered concrete. The smell inside was suffocating mold, rotting wood, damp earth, and something else, something animal and feral. I turned to look at him, silently pleading with my eyes when words failed. That's when he removed his belt. It wasn't his everyday belt, but a thicker strap of dark leather with a heavy brass buckle that gleamed dully in the inadequate light. I had never seen this belt before, and somehow knew he had been saving it for a special occasion. "Do you know why you're here, Marcella?" he asked, wrapping one end of the belt around his fist, leaving a long section dangling. "Because I failed the year," I stammered, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. No." He shook his head slowly, deliberately. "You're here because you lied. Because you deceived me. Because you made your mother lie to me too. The failure is just a consequence of your laziness. But the lie deserves special punishment." The first blow came without warning. The leather cracked across my back through the thin nightgown, and the pain was so intense I bit my tongue to keep from screaming, tasting copper. "This is for you to learn," he said, his voice still eerily controlled as the belt rose and fell. Each lie, each poor grade, each day you made a fool of me. I lost count of how many times the leather connected with my flesh. 5, 10, perhaps more? Eventually, my legs gave way, and I collapsed onto the dirty floor, curling into a defensive ball, protecting my face with my arms. When he finally stopped, I was nearly unconscious from pain. Through a haze, I heard the sound of the belt being placed on an old crate. Now you're going to stay here and think about what you've done, he said, walking toward the door. Maybe a night in the dark will help clear your mind. No, Dad, please. I managed to cry out, desperation overpowering fear. Don't leave me here. But he was already outside, one hand on the door. Tomorrow, if I'm in a good mood, maybe I'll let you out. If you cry or make noise, you stay longer. The door closed with a hollow thud. I heard the padlock clicking into place, then footsteps retreating up the stairs, until silence engulfed me. And then the light went out. I had never known darkness so absolute. It was a living entity, dense, suffocating, pressing against my skin like wet velvet. In that basement without windows, without the smallest crack for light to penetrate, I couldn't see my own hand before my face. The sounds, however, seemed amplified tenfold. Water dripping steadily somewhere in a corner. Cockroaches scuttling across walls. The house settling above me with creaks and groans. And other noises my terrified mind transformed into monsters coming to devour me in the blackness. I crawled to what felt like the driest corner, using my hands to navigate the unseen obstacles. Broken chair legs, stacked newspapers, something furry that made me recoil. My back burned where the belt had left its marks, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through my small frame. I huddled against the wall, hugging my knees tightly to my chest. I was shaking violently from cold, from fear, from pain. My teeth chattered so loudly, I clamped them shut, afraid the noise would carry upstairs and anger my father further. Time lost all meaning. Without light, without a clock, each minute stretched like an hour, each hour like an eternity. I closed my eyes trying to sleep, but fear and pain kept me awake. When exhaustion finally won and I dozed briefly, the slightest noise would jerk me back to terrified consciousness. Sometime in what must have been early morning, I heard different footsteps on the stairs, lighter, more hesitant. Then a whisper through the door. "Marcella, sweetie, are you there?" My mother's voice pierced the darkness like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. I dragged myself to the door, pain momentarily forgotten. Mom! I whispered back, my voice raw from silent crying. "Get me out of here, please." "I can't, sweetheart." Her voice broke. "He took the key and hid it somewhere. I've looked everywhere." My heart sank. Even my mother, my only ally, couldn't help me. Did he hurt you badly?" she asked, her voice so faint I strained to hear. "Yes," I answered, simply lacking the strength to elaborate. A muffled sob came from the other side of the door. "I'll bring water and food when he leaves for work. Just hold on, my angel. This will pass." I heard her retreat cautiously up the stairs, and I returned to my corner slightly comforted, knowing I wasn't completely forgotten. Sleep eventually claimed me. I woke to the sound of the door opening and weak morning light spilling in, along with my mother, who carried a glass of water and a piece of bread. "Eat quickly," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the stairs. "He left for work, but might return if he forgets something." I drank the water greedily, my parched throat burning with relief. The bread disappeared in 3 desperate bites. "Mom, please, get me out," I begged, clutching the hem of her house dress. "Please." She knelt before me, and only then did I notice the purple bruise blooming on her cheekbone. My father had struck her too. "I can't, sweetheart," she said, voice trembling. "He swore that if I let you out, it will be worse. He'll take you away somewhere far from me." The desperation in her eyes told me everything. She was as trapped as I was, just in a different prison. "When will he let me out?" I asked, feeling tears return. "He said this evening, if you stay quiet and think about what you did," she answered, gently stroking my tangled hair. "Just hold on a little longer, okay? I'll come back as soon as I can." But evening came and went, and still my father didn't release me. My mother managed to visit twice more that day, always bearing a little water, a scrap of bread, and the same fear in her eyes of being discovered. When night fell, darkness reclaimed the basement. My mother had left a candle and matches hidden in a corner, but warned me to use them only if absolutely necessary, lest the light beneath the door alert my father. The second day dawned, and still I remained imprisoned. My mother appeared in the morning, her face even more haggard. "He says he needs more time to think," she explained wearily. "Maybe tomorrow." Days blurred together. My body ached from the hard floor and cold. The wounds on my back still stung, and hunger gnawed constantly at my stomach, despite my mother's clandestine feedings. On what must have been the fourth day, though it could have been the fifth, my sense of time had become so distorted, I woke to the sounds of argument from upstairs. My father's voice raised in anger, my mother's pleading. Then silence. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. My heart raced as I heard the padlock being manipulated. The door swung open, revealing my father's imposing silhouette against the dim light from the stairwell. "Your mother thinks you've learned your lesson," he said, entering the basement and closing the door behind him. The weak light bulb flickered back to life. "But I'm not convinced." In the sickly yellow light, his face appeared grotesque shadows, deepening the hollows of his eyes, highlighting the harsh angles of his jaw. There was something in his expression I'd never seen before, something that went beyond anger or disappointment. It almost looked like pleasure. Pleasure at seeing me there, broken and terrified. He reached for his belt, the same thick strap from days before, and my entire body began to tremble uncontrollably. Please, Dad," I stammered through cracked lips. "I learned my lesson. I swear I'll never lie again. I'll never get poor grades again." He laughed a sound without humor. "It's easy to make promises when you're scared, isn't it? But let's make sure they stick." The belt whistled through the air. Once, twice, 3 times. I no longer had the strength to even protect myself. I simply curled tighter, feeling each blow open new cuts atop those that hadn't yet healed. When he tired of the belt, he grabbed a bucket of water I hadn't noticed by the door and threw its icy contents over me. "To wash away the laziness," he said, as I gasped and coughed, now soaked and shivering violently in the cold basement air. He left, locking the door again, leaving me wet, wounded, and more desperate than ever. I don't know how many more days passed. Time had lost all meaning. My mother continued her furtive visits, bringing meager sustenance, cleaning my wounds with a damp cloth, crying softly, while begging me to endure just a little longer. During one such visit, perhaps the 6th or 7th day of my imprisonment, something had changed in her demeanor. A steely determination had replaced the perpetual fear in her eyes. "I'm going to get you out of here," she whispered, glancing nervously at the stairs. "Not today, but soon. I need to prepare everything first." I asked, afraid to hope, yet unable to stop myself. "My brother," she said so quietly I had to lean closer to hear. "Gerald. I sent word to him. He's a sheriff in Virginia. He's going to help us." Uncle Gerald. I barely remembered him, a tall man with my mother's eyes who had visited once years ago. My father had argued bitterly with him and afterward forbidden my mother from contacting her family again. When I asked, a fragile thread of hope lighting in my chest, he said he'll be here in 2 days. "I'm going to get you out before your father returns from work, and we'll go straight to the police station. Gerald will be waiting." The next 48 hours were both endless and fleeting. Each minute crawled by, yet I knew time was rushing toward a moment that would change everything. My mother visited less frequently, busy, I assumed, with preparations for our escape. When she did appear, she was agitated, her eyes constantly darting toward the stairs, hands trembling as she passed me water or food. Outside, a winter storm had gathered. I could hear the wind howling through the basement's small ventilation grate, rattling the house's foundation. Rain began to fall heavily during the night, drumming against the ground-level windows that were too filthy to see through. By morning, water had started seeping under the basement door, just a trickle at first, then a steady flow as the street drains apparently backed up. The floor, already damp, became increasingly wet, forcing me to climb atop an old dresser to stay dry. When my mother next appeared, she gasped at the water now covering the basement floor to a depth of several inches. My God," she whispered. The storm drain must have overflowed. "Marcella, this isn't safe. There are electrical cords down there." Indeed, ancient wiring for the basement light ran along the walls, near the floor now partially submerged. "I have to get you out now," she said decisively. "I found the key yesterday in his work jacket. I made a copy at the hardware store while he was at work." She unlocked the padlock with shaking hands. "Come quickly. He's at work, but this storm might bring him home early if the market closes." As I tried to stand, my legs buckled weak from days of confinement and malnutrition. My mother had to lift me from the dresser and half carry me through the rising water toward the stairs. We had just reached the bottom step when a terrible sound froze us in place. The front door opening upstairs, followed by my father's voice calling out, "Betty, where are you? The market closed early because of flooding." My mother's face drained of color. "My God," she breathed. "He's home." For a moment, panic paralyzed us both. Then my mother made a swift decision. "Stay here," she whispered, helping me sit on the third step just above the water level. "I'll distract him, get him into the kitchen. When you hear us in there, go upstairs and hide in the hall closet. Don't make a sound." She kissed my forehead fiercely, then hurried up the stairs, closing the door behind her, but crucially not locking it. I heard her voice artificially bright. "Anthony, you're soaked. Come into the kitchen. I just made coffee." Why weren't you answering? What were you doing in the basement?" His voice was instantly suspicious. "Checking for flooding," she replied smoothly. "The Hendersons next door said their basement is underwater. I was worried about ours." "Is it flooding?" "A little water coming in, nothing serious. Come warm up." I heard their footsteps moving toward the kitchen at the back of the house. Gathering what little strength remained in my body, I pushed myself up and began climbing the stairs as quietly as possible. Each step was agony, my legs, weak, my back still raw from the belt. But fear gave me energy I didn't know I possessed. I reached the top of the stairs and eased the door open, praying it wouldn't creak. From the kitchen came the sound of my parents' voices, my mother asking questions about the market closure, my father complaining about the weather. I slipped through the door into the hallway and headed for the closet my mother had mentioned. And that's when disaster struck. In my weakened state, I stumbled against a small table in the hall, sending a ceramic figurine crashing to the floor. The sound might as well have been a gunshot. "What was that?" My father's voice suddenly alert. "Probably just the wind knocking something over," my mother said quickly. "I'll check." "No, I'll check." Heavy footsteps approached the hallway. I froze, a rabbit caught in headlights, too terrified to move. My father appeared, stopping abruptly when he saw me standing there, filthy wet, trembling. His eyes widened, then narrowed to dangerous slits. "Are you?" he breathed, and in that single word was a universe of fury. My mother rushed in behind him. "Anthony, please, the basement's flooding. It wasn't safe." He whirled on her. "You let her out after I specifically told you. There's water down there, electrical wires. She could have been electrocuted." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, perhaps even concern. Then it hardened again into familiar anger. "Get back downstairs," he ordered, grabbing my arm roughly. "No, Anthony." My mother's voice took on a strength I'd never heard before. I won't let you put her back there. It's not safe, and it's not right. This has gone far enough. My father turned slowly, menacingly. What did you say to me? My mother stood straighter, though fear was evident in her eyes. I said no. This ends now. What happened next occurred so quickly I could barely process it. My father lunged at my mother, his open hand connecting with her face in a slap that echoed through the house. She stumbled backward, but remained standing. You don't tell me what to do in my own house, he roared. Something snapped inside me, then some final thread of fear or restraint. I threw myself forward, pounding my small fists against his back. Leave her alone! I screamed. Leave her alone! He turned and backhanded me so hard I flew across the hallway, crashing into the wall. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and I tasted blood where my lip had split. Through a haze, I saw my father advancing toward me, belt already in hand, face contorted with rage. I braced myself for pain, but it never came. Instead, there was a tremendous crash as the front door burst open. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, water streaming from a rain-drenched coat. That's enough, Anthony. The voice was deep, authoritative, and vaguely familiar. Uncle Gerald had arrived a day early. The tableau froze for an instant, my father with belt raised, my mother pressing a hand to her reddened cheek, me crumpled against the wall, and Uncle Gerald filling the doorway, rain dripping from his broad-brimmed hat onto the floor. Who the hell are you to barge into my house? My father snarled, though I noticed he lowered the belt slightly. Gerald Wilson Sheriff's Department, Fairfax County, Virginia. Uncle Gerald replied calmly, showing a badge. And, more importantly, Betty's brother. You have no jurisdiction here, my father said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Maybe not as a sheriff. Uncle Gerald agreed, stepping fully inside and closing the door behind him. But I've already spoken with the Brooklyn Police Department this morning. They're very interested in reports of child endangerment and domestic abuse at this address. My mother moved to my side, helping me to my feet, drawing me close to her. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows. But inside the house, a different kind of storm was reaching its climax. This is none of your business, my father said. What happens in my family stays in my family. It became my business when Betty called me 3 days ago, crying so hard she could barely speak, Uncle Gerald replied, removing his wet coat. Beneath it, I noticed with a jolt, he wore a holstered gun. It became my business when she told me you've been keeping an 8-year-old child locked in a flooding basement. My father's eyes darted from Uncle Gerald to the front door, calculating. I wouldn't, Uncle Gerald advised, noticing the glance. Officers Ramirez and Sullivan are parked right outside. I asked them to wait in the patrol car until I assessed the situation. Something changed in my father then. The anger seemed to drain away, replaced by something colder, more calculating. This is all a misunderstanding, he said, forcing a laugh. Sure, I punished the girl, but what father doesn't discipline his child? She's difficult, has learning problems. The doctor confirmed it. Ask Betty. The doctor said she has dyslexia, my mother interjected quietly. Not that she deserves to be beaten and locked in a basement. My father's face contorted with rage again. You shut your... Anthony! Uncle Gerald's voice cut through the air like a knife. Think very carefully about your next words and actions. A tense silence fell, broken only by the drumming of rain and distant thunder. Then, with a movement so sudden it startled us all, my father bolted for the kitchen and the back door. Uncle Gerald was after him in an instant, surprisingly fast for his size. There was a crash from the kitchen, sounds of struggle, a shout. Then silence. Minutes later, Uncle Gerald returned, slightly winded, adjusting his rumpled shirt. He'll be staying put until the officers come in, he said grimly. He knelt before me, his face softening as he took in my condition, the bruises, the filthy nightgown now stiff with dried blood, and dirt my matted hair and hollow eyes. Hello, Marcella. he said gently. Do you remember me? I'm your Uncle Gerald. Last time I saw you, you were about 4 years old. I nodded slightly, unable to speak. Everything was happening too fast, too dramatically after days of unchanging darkness. I'm going to help you and your mom now, he continued, voice steady and reassuring. We're going to get you to a doctor, get you cleaned up, and make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Is that okay? I nodded again, tears finally breaking free. He turned to my mother, who stood trembling, one arm still around my shoulders. Betty, pack whatever essentials you need for you and Marcella. You're not staying here tonight or ever again if you don't want to. As my mother hurried to gather our things, Uncle Gerald went outside briefly to signal the waiting officers. They entered moments later, bringing with them the smell of rain and purpose. The older officer, Sullivan, according to his nameplate, surveyed the scene quickly, his experienced eyes taking in my condition, the belt discarded on the floor, the open basement door, with water now visibly spilling onto the hallway floor. Where is he? He asked Uncle Gerald. Kitchen. I used my handcuffs already. He's not going anywhere. Officer Ramirez, younger and visibly affected by what he was seeing, approached me cautiously. Hey there, he said, voice kind. My name's Officer Ramirez. Would it be okay if I took some pictures to document your injuries? I looked questioningly at Uncle Gerald, who nodded encouragement. It's important, Marcella, he explained, so we can make sure your father is held accountable for what he did. I stood still as Officer Ramirez photographed my bruised face, the welts visible through tears in my nightgown, my raw, bleeding knees. Each flash of the camera seemed to capture and seal away a piece of the nightmare, transforming it from present horror to documented past. From the kitchen came the sound of my father's voice, no longer angry, but coldly controlled, refusing to answer Officer Sullivan's questions. My mother returned with a small suitcase. She had changed into a clean dress and brought clothes for me, as well as a simple outfit she helped me into, while Uncle Gerald and Officer Ramirez respectfully turned away. We'll need statements from both of you, Officer Ramirez explained as I dressed. But it can wait until you've seen a doctor. I've made arrangements at Brooklyn Methodist, Uncle Gerald said. They're expecting us. Minutes later, we were leaving my mother and I in Uncle Gerald's car, my father, in the back of the police cruiser. As we pulled away from the only home I had ever known, I looked back through the rain-streaked window. Our small house, with its peeling paint and crooked steps, seemed to shrink and diminish as if the past itself were receding. Water continued to pool around its foundation, seeping in to cleanse what could not be saved. The hospital was a blur of bright lights, gentle hands, and concerned voices. Doctors examined me thoroughly, cleaning wounds, applying ointments, asking questions in soft, careful tones. She's dehydrated and malnourished, I heard one doctor tell Uncle Gerald and my mother. Some of these lacerations on her back are infected, and there's evidence of older injuries that have healed improperly. My mother wept quietly in a plastic chair, while Uncle Gerald paced the examination room, his face growing grimmer with each new discovery. Social workers arrived, kind-faced women with clipboards, who spoke to me as if I were much younger than 8, asking about my father, my home life, my school. Had this happened before? How often did my father get angry? Was I afraid to go home? I answered truthfully, too exhausted and relieved to do otherwise. Yes, he had hit me before. Yes, he often got angry. Yes, I was terrified of going back. The doctors wanted to keep me overnight for observation. My mother refused to leave my side, curling up in a chair beside my hospital bed, holding my hand, even as she dozed fitfully. Uncle Gerald remained too, his tall frame somehow fitting into another uncomfortable chair, his presence a reassuring bulwark against the fear that still lingered. What happens now? I asked him during a quiet moment when my mother had stepped out briefly. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. Well, your father will be charged with child abuse and domestic violence. There will be a court hearing. He'll probably go to jail for what he did. And us? My small voice sounded strange to my own ears. That depends on what your mother wants. he replied carefully. "But I've invited you both to come stay with me in Virginia, at least until you get back on your feet." I nodded, trying to imagine life without my father's looming presence, without the constant fear. It seemed impossible, like trying to picture a color I'd never seen. "Uncle Gerald," I whispered, "why does he hate me so much?" A shadow crossed his face. He reached out to smooth my hair gently. "He doesn't hate you, Marcella. I think he hates something in himself that he sees reflected in you. But that's not your fault. None of this is your fault." I didn't understand then what he meant. It would be years before I grasped the truth behind those words, years before I learned that my father's rage had roots that predated my existence. The next morning, a specialist came to see me, a doctor with kind eyes and a soft voice who specialized in learning disabilities. Dr. Eleanor Simmons performed various tests showing me cards with pictures, asking me to read simple words, having me solve puzzles. "Marcella has dyslexia," she explained afterward to my mother and Uncle Gerald. "It's a specific learning disability that affects how the brain processes written language. Letters appear to switch positions, words jumble. It has nothing to do with intelligence. In fact, many dyslexic individuals are highly intelligent." "Is there a cure?" My mother asked the same question she had posed to Dr. Patterson more than a year earlier. "Not a cure, but there are teaching methods that can help tremendously," Dr. Simmons replied. "With the right support, Marcella can learn to read and write effectively. It will always be more challenging than for other children, but absolutely possible." She turned to me with a smile. "You're not lazy or stupid, Marcella. Your brain just works differently, and that's okay." For the first time in my young life, I felt a weight lift the crushing burden of believing I was fundamentally flawed. There was a name for my struggle, and more importantly, there was hope. 3 days later, after I was released from the hospital, my mother and I boarded a train bound for Virginia. Uncle Gerald had gone ahead to prepare for our arrival, arranging temporary housing and speaking with local schools about my situation. As the train pulled away from Penn Station, my mother gazed out the window at the receding New York skyline. "Are we ever coming back?" I asked, sensing her melancholy. She squeezed my hand. "I don't know, sweetheart, but right now we need a fresh start, both of us." Virginia was like another world. Uncle Gerald lived in a small but neat house on the outskirts of Fairfax, surrounded by trees that rustled in the gentle spring breeze. The air smelled different, cleaner, filled with the scent of pine and earth rather than city exhaust and fish markets. He had prepared the guest room for us 2 twin beds with patchwork quilts, a window overlooking a small garden where cardinals flashed like living rubies among green leaves. Everything felt lighter there, as if gravity itself had less hold. "It's just temporary," he assured us on our first evening as we sat on his back porch drinking lemonade. "Until you decide what you want to do next, Betty." My mother nodded, looking more relaxed than I had seen her in years. "I need to find work," she said thoughtfully. "I can sew, cook, clean. Mrs. Wilkins from Social Services mentioned that Harmon's department store is hiring sales associates," Uncle Gerald replied. "She said she'd be happy to put in a good word." My mother smiled a genuine smile that transformed her tired face. "That would be wonderful. I've always wanted to work in a proper store." I listened to them discuss adult matters, feeling strangely disconnected from my previous life. It seemed impossible that just a week earlier, I had been locked in a dark basement, believing I might die there. The court proceedings happened largely without me. I gave my statement to a kind-eyed woman in a small room with soft chairs and toys, while a camera recorded from an unobtrusive corner. I didn't have to face my father or endure cross-examination. For this small mercy, I remain eternally grateful. My mother, however, had to testify in person. She would return from these court appearances drained and shaking, but with increasing strength in her spine. "He just sat there," she told Uncle Gerald after one such day as I pretended to read a picture book nearby. No emotion, not even when they showed the photographs of Marcella's back, like he was watching someone else's trial. "That's how men like Anthony survive," Uncle Gerald replied quietly. They compartmentalize. Whatever doesn't fit their narrative gets locked away, just like— He stopped glancing at me, just like I had been locked away. Meanwhile, I started at a new school, a special program for children with learning disabilities. My teacher there, Ms. Adams, was nothing like any educator I had encountered before. Patient, innovative, she taught using multisensory techniques that engaged all my senses. The letter A, she would say, feels like this, and she would guide my finger to trace its shape in sand. It sounds like this, and she would make the short and long A sounds while showing pictures of apples and acorns. We used colored blocks to represent sounds, built words with magnetic letters, sang songs that reinforced phonetic patterns. Gradually, miraculously, the dancing letters began to stay still. Words started to make sense. Reading, which had been torture, became merely difficult, then eventually manageable. For the first time, I experienced success in a classroom. The first book I read independently, a simple story about a dog, remains one of my most treasured accomplishments. I ran to show my mother, who was preparing dinner in Uncle Gerald's kitchen. Mom, listen. I read the entire first page without a single mistake. She dropped the wooden spoon she was holding and wrapped me in an embrace so tight I could feel her heart beating against mine. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, her tears dampening my hair. So proud. Life settled into a new rhythm. My mother secured the job at Harmon's department store, working first in the stockroom, then advancing to the sales floor, where her natural grace and eye for fashion were appreciated. For the first time in her adult life, she earned her own money, made her own decisions. I continued at the special school, making slow but steady progress. The nightmares that had plagued me, initially dreams of darkness, of being trapped, of my father's rage, gradually diminished in frequency, though they never disappeared entirely. My father's trial concluded with a 15-year prison sentence. When my mother told me, I felt nothing, neither joy nor sadness, just a vast emptiness where fear had previously resided. He'll never hurt you again, she promised, mistaking my silence for continued terror. We're safe now, and we were safe not just physically, but emotionally as well. Without my father's oppressive presence, both my mother and I blossomed. She began to laugh again, to sing while cooking, to wear colors other than the muted tones he had preferred. I discovered that learning could be enjoyable, that I had a quick wit and a talent for storytelling. Uncle Gerald became the father figure I had never truly had. He taught me to fish in the stream behind his house, to identify constellations in the night sky, to play chess. He never raised his voice, never used physical punishment. When I made mistakes, as all children do, he would explain calmly what I had done wrong and how to do better next time. One evening, about 6 months after our arrival in Virginia, Uncle Gerald brought a guest to dinner, Ms. Wilkins from Social Services, the woman who had helped arrange my mother's job. She was younger than my mother, with auburn hair and freckles across her nose, and she laughed easily at Uncle Gerald's corny jokes. After I was sent to bed, I overheard them talking on the porch, adult conversation, punctuated by the clink of ice in glasses and occasional laughter. My mother sounded happy, relaxed. Miss Wilkins's voice was warm and interested. Uncle Gerald's deep tones held a note I hadn't heard before, something light and hopeful. Life was changing again, but this time for the better. 2 years later, Uncle Gerald married Miss Wilkins Diana in a small ceremony in the garden behind his house. My mother was matron of honor, and I served as flower girl, proudly scattering rose petals down a makeshift aisle of white cloth. By then, we had moved into our own apartment, a modest 2-bedroom unit near my school. My mother had been promoted to assistant department manager at Harmon's. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were independent, no longer relying on Uncle Gerald's generosity. On my 11th birthday, I received a gift that changed my life again, a journal with a lock and key. For your stories, my mother explained as I admired the smooth leather cover and crisp blank pages. Ms. Adams says you have a gift for writing? I filled that journal quickly with stories, poems, observations. Writing became my refuge, my joy. The same brain that struggled to decode others' words seemed specially designed to create my own. Words that danced elusively when I tried to read them flowed effortlessly when I was the one arranging them on paper. By high school, I had moved from the special education program to mainstream classes with accommodations for my dyslexia, extra time on tests oral rather than written examinations when possible access to recorded textbooks. I wasn't the top student, but I was far from the bottom. I had friends, participated in drama club, wrote for the school newspaper. My mother continued to thrive as well. She was promoted again, this time to department manager. She dated occasionally, though never seriously. "You're enough family for me," she would say when I asked why she didn't remarry. But I knew the truth. The scars from my father's abuse ran too deep. She trusted men as friends, as colleagues, but never again as partners. That part of her remained forever locked away, like a room in a house that's perfectly functional, without ever opening that particular door. When I was 16, we received news that my father had died in prison a heart attack while working in the laundry facility. My mother received the notification with a calm nod and filed the paper away without comment. I felt a complex swirl of emotions, relief that the specter of his potential release someday was forever dispelled, confusion at not feeling proper grief for my own father, and a strange emptiness where closure should have been. "Should we attend the funeral?" I asked my mother hesitantly. She looked at me steadily. "Do you want to?" I considered this carefully. "No," I finally answered. "But I feel like maybe we should. He was still my father." She sat beside me on our small sofa, taking my hands in hers. "Biology made him your father, Marcella. Nothing more. He forfeited any claim to your respect or obligation when he locked you in that basement." We didn't attend the funeral. Anthony Wilson was buried in a prison cemetery, his grave marked with only a number. The final indignity for a man who had cared so deeply about how others perceived him. Months later, while helping my mother clean the apartment, I found a small box containing documents from the trial. Curiosity overcame me, and I began reading through the papers, police reports, medical assessments, court transcripts. Among them was a report I had never seen before, a psychological evaluation of my father conducted during his incarceration. Most of it was written in clinical language I didn't fully understand, but one paragraph caught my attention and forever changed how I viewed what had happened. Subject demonstrates classic signs of undiagnosed dyslexia with reading comprehension tested at 4th grade level despite average intelligence. When questioned about his limited literacy, subject became hostile and denied any difficulty, claiming he just didn't see the point of books. Further investigation revealed a history of physical punishment by his father for poor academic performance, creating a cycle of shame, anger, and educational avoidance that appears to have been transferred to his relationship with his daughter. My father had dyslexia, the same condition he had punished me so severely, for he himself had suffered from. The realization hit me like a physical blow, the tragic irony that he had tortured me for manifesting the very trait he most feared and hated in himself. I showed the report to my mother that evening. "Did you know?" I asked as she read it, her expression unreadable. "I suspected," she said, finally setting the paper down. "He never read anything if he could avoid it. Bill's letters, he always had me read them aloud. I thought it was laziness then, later wondered if it might be the same issue you had. But by then, our marriage had become—" She paused, searching for words. "Well, not really a marriage at all, just survival." That night, I wrote in my journal until my hand cramped, trying to process this new knowledge, to understand the twisted path that had led my father to become my tormentor. Not to forgive, I couldn't forgive, but perhaps to comprehend. I graduated high school with respectable grades and a scholarship to a state college where I studied education with a focus on learning disabilities. The girl who had once been told she was too stupid to learn was now preparing to teach others like herself. In college, I met Robert, a quiet engineering student who patiently helped me with math in exchange for my assistance with his English papers. Our relationship developed, slowly built on friendship and mutual respect. When he proposed after graduation, I hesitated, the ghosts of my childhood still haunting me. I'm afraid, I confessed, that the damage inside me goes too deep, that I might pass on my father's anger, his capacity for cruelty. Robert took my hands, his eyes steady on mine. We are not our parents, Marcella. We learn from them what to do and what not to do. I've watched you with the children you tutor. There isn't an ounce of cruelty in you. We married in a small ceremony with my mother and Uncle Gerald's family in attendance. My mother, now in her 40s and a store manager, looked beautiful in a pale blue dress she had chosen without anyone else's approval, a small freedom she still cherished. Robert and I moved to Philadelphia, where I found work at a school specializing in children with learning differences. Years passed in happy rhythm, challenging but fulfilling work, a loving partnership. Weekends spent visiting my mother or hosting her in our home. When our first child was born, a son, we named Paul. I watched him obsessively for signs of dyslexia, both hoping he would be spared and knowing I would have the tools to help him if he wasn't. Sure enough, as he reached school age, the familiar signs appeared: letter reversals, reading difficulties, the frustration I remembered so well. But unlike my childhood experience, Paul's journey was supported by understanding parents, knowledgeable teachers, and appropriate interventions. I'm like you, Mommy," he said one day after a particularly successful reading session, beaming with pride rather than shame. Yes, I agreed, hugging him close. You're exactly like me, and that's a wonderful thing. The years have slipped by like pages turning in a well-loved book. My hair has silvered, my hands have developed the same fine creases my mother's once had. But my passion for teaching children with learning differences has never dimmed. Paul overcame his dyslexia enough to become an architect designing buildings with an intuitive understanding of space that I attribute to his different way of processing information. Our daughter Mary became a civil rights attorney, perhaps influenced by the stories I eventually shared about my childhood. My mother lived to see her grandchildren grow up, passing peacefully in her sleep at 82. Uncle Gerald and Aunt Diana celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a family tree with branches spreading wide and healthy, nourished by love rather than fear. And me. After 40 years of teaching, I retired to this apartment in Brooklyn, returning to the city of my birth, but as a different person entirely. The neighborhood has changed, almost beyond recognition. The fish market where my father worked has long since relocated. Our old house was demolished decades ago to make way for new development. But sometimes, walking these streets, I catch glimpses of ghosts, a small girl with dark braids clutching a book she cannot read. A tired woman in a faded dress, eyes downcast. A man with work-roughened hands and rage simmering beneath his skin. I started this Grandparents' Tales channel at my grandchildren's urging. Share your story, Grandma, they insisted. It might help someone. And perhaps it has. The comments and messages I receive suggest so people who recognize their own struggles with learning disabilities, their own childhood traumas, their own journeys toward healing. I've told you my darkest moments today, my dears. The basement that nearly became my tomb. The father who could not see past his own pain to recognize mine. The mother who found courage when it mattered most. But I've also shared my light, the teachers who believed in me, the family who rescued me, the life I built from the broken pieces of my beginning. If you're listening to this and you're suffering abuse, please know that help exists. If you're struggling with dyslexia or any learning difference, understand that your brain isn't broken, it's simply wired differently. If you're a parent frustrated with a child who can't seem to learn, please look deeper for the real causes before judgment or punishment. My father died without ever acknowledging the damage he caused, without recognizing the tragic irony that he punished me for having the very condition he himself suffered from. His story ended in bitterness and isolation, but my story, our story, continued. Through education, through love, through breaking the cycle of shame and violence, we transformed what could have been a legacy of pain into one of healing and hope. That's the true miracle, my dears. Not that I survived that basement, though that was miracle enough, but that I emerged from darkness to build a life filled with light to help other children find their way through their own personal darkness. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my father had received the help he needed as a child. If someone had recognized his dyslexia, taught him appropriately, shown him compassion rather than punishment. Perhaps he would have become a different man. Perhaps our family story would have unfolded differently. We'll never know. But what I do know is this understanding breaks cycles. Compassion heals wounds. Education illuminates paths previously hidden. And love, persistent, patient love, can transform even the deepest trauma into wisdom and purpose. Thank you for listening to this old woman's tale. Remember, whether you're 8 or 80, your story isn't finished yet. There are always new chapters waiting to be written, new beginnings possible even after the darkest nights. This is Grandma Marcy signing off for today. Until next time, hold your loved ones close. Be gentle with yourselves, and remember, we are all works in progress, beautiful even in our imperfections.